So let me first introduce myself. I'm so glad that all of you could join us this morning. My name's Tasha Bleistein, and I've worked on and off with grassroots ESL or the Azusa literacy classes, the ESL classes, and tutoring for around 8 years. My full-time position is I am a TESOL professor teaching English to speakers of other languages, and I direct our online TESOL program at Azusa Pacific University. I've taught ESL or been involved in the field for more than 20 years, and I even co-authored a book on language tutoring. So I'm passionate about English language learners. I'm passionate about tutoring, and I'm excited for this training and to talk about how I've trained tutors locally in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on how we have been doing it in Azusa previously. So the grassroots ESL training, we would typically have twice a year in person from 9 o'clock a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. on a Saturday morning. So it was a long time for people to commit to on a Saturday morning. The tutor coordinator from the library would bring breakfast and snacks, and we would have a break in the middle because it was 4 hours. And we would begin with logistics. So the schedule for the day, where's the restroom, things like that. Also, they would register, any tutors who came would register, and they would get information about the sites around the city. And so all of that sort of logistical information, like how do you fill out attendance sheets, we would cover first, and then I would take over and I would begin the tutor training. So I'm going to go ahead and do the tutor training like I would in person, although it'll be a little bit different because we're on Zoom. So tutors often want practical information, like what do I do in my first session, especially if they're new. But I think it's important to cover some theoretical ideas also. You get a variety of tutors. Some have a lot of experience in education and even in the English language learner population or with that population. But you also get a number who've never tutored before and who haven't had a good deal of interaction with this population. So I think it's important to talk about second language acquisition and then also adult learners. What's specific about how we learn languages and when we're working with adult learners. So that's how we would start the training. So I would try to convince them that knowing who your learners are and what's unique about that adult learner population is very important. Also, what is unique about the language learning experience and how it impacts you, and what attitudes we might have that we haven't explored as tutors, and then how can we tutor this group of learners? So those are the things that we'll cover in these next few slides. So one thing that adult learners need is they need to feel connected to the content that they're learning. They need to feel like it's practical and relevant to their lives. And textbooks, some tutoring programs use textbooks. They're often not connected to the actual lives of our students. So sometimes they focus on college students, and they don't relate to the day-to-day experiences that the learners are having, like going to the post office and having a communication breakdown that makes them discouraged about their English language ability, or receiving some sort of bill in the mail and not being able to understand why they're being charged or why that bill has gone up or in their email. Another common issue that the tutors would encounter with their learners is something is going on at school and I want to talk with the administrators or the teachers, and I don't know how to fully interact with the teachers at the school. So this is your first chance to be involved. In the chat, can you think of some other activities or topics that you think learners in your area would be interested in knowing about because it impacts their everyday life? So what do our English learners want to know about? So in the chat, can you share a few ideas?
Going to the grocery store.
The grocery store. Yes, that's always a fun one. People like to talk about food. Yes, interacting with coworkers, driving tests, doctor's visits. They're going so fast. Rent and landlord issues. These are all everyday things that we deal with. And language is a big part of that. Kids' sports teams, technology at work, electrical bills. These are great ideas. So these are the things that students or learners often want to talk about. Oh, how to open an email without forgetting your password. That's a good one. I need to work on that one too. Great ideas. So these are the things that we often want to address in these smaller group tutoring sessions with adult learners who are coming to a program that's sponsored by a library or another literacy agency. Something else to consider is when adult learners come to English language tutoring, oftentimes it's not only about language learning, it's also because they want to connect with other people in their area. So they're coming to socialize as much as to learn English sometimes. They may feel isolated because of language issues. So they come to build those relationships with others in the tutoring sessions. They want to feel comfortable with the tutor and with their other learners, and that will help them to relax and learn. Language learning, especially, we can have anxiety about making mistakes. And so the more comfortable we can make the atmosphere for the learners, the more that they'll be able to learn and the more they'll enjoy the sessions. So I have another chat opportunity here. What are some questions you could ask or activities that you could include in a tutoring session that would encourage the learners who come to know each other better? So let's see what you have. Self-introductions. I like that. Favorite foods. Again, students in general or people in general like to talk about food. Family, icebreaker questions, celebrations, cultural foods. Ooh, one of my favorite parts of tutoring or teaching ESL is the potlucks. Yes, that's always a good way to get to know each other better. Great. So consider how you can help the learners to know each other better and also for you to get to know them better so they can relax and they can learn language better. There's something in language learning that we call willingness to communicate. And some of us maybe are more willing to communicate than others. Language learners have to be able to relax and be willing to communicate in order to learn, because they need to process what they're taking in and then be able to share that with others by that feedback loop that they're going to get when they talk. Then they get feedback if someone understood them, and also they can get correction if they need it. So it's important to help learners to know that it's common for us to make mistakes. We have to make mistakes. It's part of the learning process, and to feel comfortable making mistakes with the language. One thing that you could do is at the beginning of sessions when you're starting with a new group is create some ground rules together. And one of those could be to be supportive of each other when they're making mistakes, to be kind, and you could model what that means for the learners so that there's this atmosphere where they don't have to feel that someone's judging them for having English that's not as good as someone else's, or for when they make a mistake. I like to tell the students in my classes or in my tutoring sessions that I'm so proud of them because they're trying and they're learning. When they make a mistake, that's especially good because we can all learn from it. So encouraging them to communicate. I don't know if any of you have learned a language before or spoken with others in a second language on a regular basis. I am constantly in I have a second and a third language. In my third language, I never want to speak because I'm always afraid of making mistakes because my language ability is not as good in that language. And so I completely relate to some of our learners who just have that anxiety about making mistakes and don't want to communicate. So we have to help them to feel so comfortable that they're willing to make those mistakes. It's important that we show respect to the learners. And it's also important to realize that respect looks very different depending on what culture we're coming from. So we might think that the learners are disrespectful, but what they're doing is completely acceptable in their culture. Some things that are pretty universal is taking time to greet the learners when they come to a session and starting the sessions with small talk, letting them share about their lives. Again, this builds that rapport that will keep them coming back because they enjoy interacting with you, the tutor, and with the others who are learning. You could try as a tutor to learn some of the greetings in their home languages. And then you can also look at how you maybe correct behavior and try not to shame the learners. So it's really important that when you're learning a language, you receive feedback. And learners want that feedback. So if they're making mistakes that are inhibiting communication, we want to give them that feedback, but we want to do it in ways that are respectful and not shaming them. And then if we're having some behavior issues, which of course with adults we don't have as many, but sometimes there are things that come up in tutoring sessions that we might need to address. So instead of calling out any of those behaviors in the larger group, we can have a dialogue, pull someone aside and say, something like the example there, I've noticed that you often talk when others are talking. Is that common in classes in your home country? So phrasing these as questions that we ask instead of behaviors that they need to change, that's a very different kind of conversation. And so look for things that might be inhibiting others from learning because the behavior is impacting others. One of my friends who tutors recently told me she had a couple who dominated every discussion, and then the others didn't want to come to the class anymore because these two were dominating everything. Every time she asked a question, the two of them would talk and they weren't allowing space for others to talk. So situations like that, you can address by opening up that dialogue. Okay, language identity. If you speak two languages, maybe you've realized that even your sense of who you are can be different in the different languages. And our language is deeply connected to our sense of identity. So we want to be aware as tutors of what the emotional journey is of language learning. I remember when I started to learn Chinese as my second language. So when I started to learn Chinese, one of my friends would tell me, "Oh, I hope you never improve." Thanks. She said, you sound like a 3-year-old when you talk, and it's so cute. I thought, okay, well, I'm an adult. I don't want to sound like a 3-year-old. Thankfully, I did improve, and I don't still sound like a 3-year-old. But it's deeply connected to who I am, right? As an adult, I don't want to sound like a 3-year-old, and it can be very discouraging. There's a lot of political and other issues that are tied into our languages and what we speak. And so the learners can be fighting against their sense of identity and self-worth as they learn a language. So understanding the emotional journey that it might be just stepping into a language learning session is important. So some things that we can do as tutors is to allow them to use their first language in the sessions. It's okay. There used to be a lot of pushback and English only. This is the time where they need to only speak English, but actually this can damage their sense of identity. And we don't want them to speak in their first language all of the time. But if they can use it and their language is honored, that's different than saying, okay, English only, I don't want you speaking whatever the home language is. So keep in mind that when we're discussing language, we're also discussing their identity with them. And so you can say, okay, this is how you can use your home language in the session. And that might be say everything in English except for the one word you don't know. And you can say that in your home language and see if another one of the learners could then translate it for us. So that's a way that they can still work on their English, but they can use their home language as well. We need to, again, respect their culture. So language and culture, they're so tied to each other. As I've learned other languages and lived in other cultures, I've realized there's a completely different way of thinking that comes within that culture, and the language is the way that we express that. So we can help students to process through not just the language learning, but the cultural learning. As you stay in a country for a long period of time, you often feel a long-term culture shock or culture fatigue because everything is in a different language, or culturally, it's the way that you have to deal with life is different. And so I think understanding what's happening, what are the values that underlie this issue, why do people approach it differently? A lot of my students in the past were struggling with raising their children in a different culture, healthcare in a different culture. We approach these things different. It's not just about going to the doctor's office. It's about how I view health and healthcare, or how I view my children's education or parenting. That's different from the culture that I'm living in. So giving the students a chance to interact about those issues is important because it also will help them to feel more comfortable in the culture that they're living in. And something to be aware of for all of us is that we all think at some level, including me, that our own way is the best. And that's a form of ethnocentrism. We've been socialized into our culture. And so we have ingrained beliefs about our own culture that we might not realize. So for example, I lived in Central America for a few years, and I also lived in China for 9 years. So I would have new to China people come and they would tell me, well, if I could just tell people how to do this best, and if they could just change the way that they do this. And, I would tell them as they adjusted in their first few weeks to China, you're not going to change China. There's only one person who's going to change here, and that's you, because you're not going to change the whole system, let's say, of education in China. It's quite different than the education system in the United States. But we have those ideas of, okay, this is the best way to do things. And then this is such a good experience when we work interculturally with other or cross-culturally with other people to learn, okay, what are my cultural values, and how is that influencing what I think is right and wrong, or the right way to do something? So giving students a chance to, or the learners a chance to share about that and the experiences that they're having is really good. Did you have any conflicts with people? And, why might they have interpreted the situation the way that they did? I think those conversations are really meaningful, and they help all of us to grow and to navigate life better. So I have some examples. There's 4 on a handout that I have shared that you can have later, but this is the first one. So you're going to be in a breakout room in a minute with about 4 people, and you're going to discuss this one. So I'm going to read it to you just to make sure we're all on the same page. So your tutoring sessions are from 9 to 10:30 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And there are 5 or 6 students who arrive on time, but 3 or 4 students don't show up until 10 or 15 minutes after the start time. And this is every single session. So when they arrive, one by one, they come in and they greet everyone, they go around, they chat. And so then you can't really start the sessions until 9:20 or even close to 9:30. So you feel like you're losing a half hour of this tutoring session time with these continually late arrivals. So that's you as the tutor. So what would you do in this situation? And what values do you think might be different between the learners and the tutor in a situation? So go ahead and get in your breakout rooms and you can talk for 5 minutes. Let's go with 5 minutes and then come back and say, how would you handle it? And what values do you think? And then share any other situations like this that you've had with your experience if you have time. I hope that you had a good time in your breakout rooms. What did you come up with? You can use the chat. So what cultural issues might be happening in this example? And how would you deal with it? Does anyone want to share? Okay, I'll share what we talked about. It might take, we talked about going over expectations. Great. Thanks, Evelyn. I think that's really a great idea. Oh, what they can model for their children. Oh, good. So checking in to see who will come, who might be coming late ahead of time. Yes, we have some cultural differences related to promptness. Yeah, and the tutor can modify the lesson. Exactly. They might be late for a reason like taking kids to school. That's often an issue. Oh, good. So readjusting so that we can work with what's going on in the learners' lives. Good. And ground rules around what happens when you come late. Okay. One of the things that we talked about in our group is that these mothers were mostly from Mexico and Central America, and they tend to value relationship more than time, right? So when they came in, they were valuing greeting and interacting with the others in the class or in the session. And I shared my husband is from Central America. And so when we go to social events, he'll go around and he'll greet everyone. And then when it's time to leave, he'll go around and he'll say goodbye to everyone. And as an introvert from the United States, I didn't highly value that. I value things like timeliness. And so it's navigating those cultural differences. So we can adjust. We can also talk about what we could do as a group so that we can focus on the tasks that we might want to be focusing on, or we could have a social time that lasts for a while. One of the people in my group suggested coming earlier so we could have a social time a few minutes before. But then if, they are coming late because of family responsibilities or something, we could also talk about that. So there are 3 other scenarios like this that you could have that you could talk about with others so that you can understand cultural values that might be in conflict and how what can look like maybe disrespect is actually a lot of respect. If you're valuing relationship over things like time, then you're showing respect by greeting everyone. And then I might be processing that with my different cultural lens and not understanding that. Here's another example. So you have a mix of male and female students from different countries of origin in your tutoring group, and you ask them to work in pairs on an activity. And you have a female student who's wearing a hijab, the veil that's covering her head and chest, and she's not working with a male student partner. So what's the cultural issue and what could you do? I think this one's a little easier to see, but it's not a bad reminder about how gender interaction is different across cultures and how we can start thinking about being learners as tutors and understanding culture. Even things like asking them, well, what are classrooms like? Who does most of the talking? What do they look like in your home culture? And learning about that. So you could add to a sheet like this. You can download the 4 that I've created, but you can also add other examples if you're leading a tutoring session that are specific to the cultures that often come to your classroom. Okay, now we're going to switch a little bit. So those were related more to adult language learners and what's specific to them. This is more about second language acquisition. There's a lot of research that's been done about how we acquire a second or third language. Also, how we acquire first languages, we can learn from that. So consider how you learn to play a musical instrument or type. Was it through something like repetitive practice? You can use the chat again. Is there anything else that you've learned in the past that's automatic now that you don't have to think about? Driving. Yes, that one always comes to mind. Sometimes it's scary. I'll arrive somewhere and I'll think, how did I get here? I don't remember the process of driving here because it's automatic. Anything else that's automatic? Cooking. Oh, neat. Multiplication tables. Yeah. First language. Yes, as a baby. Knitting. I wish I knew how to knit. That sounds very relaxing. Okay, so it's the same idea with language. We want language learners to be automatic in their processing. This is actually what fluency is. If you don't have to stop and translate in your mind or think about it, then you're considered fluent, and you can be fluent in something as simple as hello. So if somebody says hello to you, you just automatically say hello back. That might be the only word you know, but you don't have to stop and think about what you're saying. You can just say it back. So to help the learners to become automatic in their processing of English, they need a lot of practice opportunities and safe practice opportunities. So they don't have to stop and think when someone says hello or how are you, it just comes out. And even for more advanced things, the same thing. So we want to give lots of practice, and we don't want to overwhelm, especially learners who are coming to tutoring sessions with too much grammar or vocabulary instruction. And we want to help correct mistakes, but not so much. I don't know if you've ever spoken in another language and you've had someone fix everything that you've said, or if it's writing, they fix everything. It's too much and it can be discouraging. So we want to give that supportive environment where we give just the right amount of correction and not overwhelming them with too much content. But pushing them towards this automatic use of the language. So repetition, especially with adult learners, is important, but language learners in general. Actually, the next session, not this Monday, but next Monday, we'll talk about this. But with vocabulary learning, it takes 10 retrievals minimum for them to even recognize that they have seen that word before and that they might know what it means. So oftentimes in sessions, we think, oh, well, I taught something one time and that's enough. That's not enough. So think about it. If you studied a set of vocabulary and a new language for yourself for 1 hour, one time, do you think that you would remember those words in a month? I probably wouldn't. And the research tells me I wouldn't too. But if you study the same vocabulary words and use them for 10 minutes, at least 6 different times in a lesson, and then the next lesson and the next lesson, your chances of remembering something and it going to your long-term memory are a lot higher. Adult learners need even more repetition. So we need sessions to have the content repeated, the vocabulary words repeated over and over again, and for them to have those automatic processing opportunities. Some things that we can do to help with that are starting with basic and simple things, the things that they already know, asking them what they know, and then moving to something new. So they're adding something new, but it has the foundation of what we did in the previous lesson or what they already know in their first language about a topic. This also acknowledges that adult learners have a lot of background that they're bringing into the classroom. Yes, they might sound like a 3-year-old, like I did in Chinese, but that doesn't mean that I don't have a language that I know and that I can do many other things in. So we want to also start the beginning of sessions with things that are easy, that are repetitive from the time before. This is also easier on us as tutors because we're recycling some of the same material, which is really good for the learners. Something else that all learners need, but adult learners maybe need even more, is they need praise. So we can praise effort. We can say, oh, I see you're trying so hard. Improvement, their attitude, their cultural learning, the progress that they're making, anything related to the language learning experience or outside of that as well. If they feel like they're being successful in the process, they're more likely to continue. So we want the experience in the tutoring sessions to be as enjoyable and as fun for the learners as possible. I've heard too many stories of people who went to their first ESL tutoring session or ESL class, and then they wanted to give up because they felt like a failure. So we have a lot of power in these settings to impact the future of language learning for the learners who are coming. So we can give specific praise or general praise. I supervise a lot of ESL teachers who are in their teacher training program. And one of them did his practicum in one of the Azusa sites. And so he was teaching about 6 women, and everything they did, he would just say, good job, awesome, amazing. His lessons were really not that great. But the learners loved him because he was so encouraging, and everything they did, he would tell them how wonderful they were. And so they just love coming to class and coming to those sessions and receiving all of that positive feedback. Specific praise is really helpful too. Like, oh, that J that you've been using the J sound and joking, it's so much clearer now if you've been working on something like helping them with pronunciation, which we'll talk about a week from today. So give a lot of praise. It's so helpful when you're doing something difficult like learning a language. Also, understanding that whatever tutoring session, however much they're coming to, it's not enough. They need to be working on language outside of that. So the more that they feel in charge of their learning and empowered over the language learning process, the more likely they are to spend time outside of sessions working on their English language too. So things that we can do are at the end of each session, say, hey, why don't you, and then you ask them, you give them a task that they can do before the next class. This doesn't mean it has to be a grammar worksheet. It could be something like, ask your child about this, this, and this in English. So we try to connect what we're doing in the class and then push them towards using that. Watch the news and then report back whatever. So think of things depending on the level of the students you have that they can do. Sometimes I would have them have a little ongoing activity that they would work on too. And then they would come and the beginning of the session, they would report how that's going. So help them to set their own goals and then monitor the progress that they're making. Okay, we have a lot of different kinds of students who come, which is truthfully one of the joys of working with English language learners. But we have some differences that can make it really challenging to teach, even for the most experienced English language educators. So one of the challenges is different ages. So puberty is an important milestone when we're talking about language learning because pronunciation, the ability to learn pronunciation does diminish after puberty. So if you have learners who think that they want to sound just like they were born in the United States, it's possible for a very, very small percentage of them, maybe. But for the most part, it does become harder to change your pronunciation after puberty. And then some say that our ability to learn a language does diminish slightly or gradually decline. So you may have noticed if you've had experience with older learners that they struggle a little bit more. So they need even more practice and they may need more processing time than younger learners. But all people can learn languages and they can learn them at all ages. So you can also encourage them that the research shows that we can all learn a language and we can learn languages at different stages in our life too. I think we're all familiar with the idea of learning styles and that we all have some preferred ways of learning. So when we're in a session, we want to especially give visual aids for the learners. So this could be when you introduce a new word, you write it on the board so they can see how it's spelled, or you have them write it on their paper, or you have them draw something on their paper. So visual learners, they want to see that. And then auditory learners learn through listening and speaking. Tactile learners want to touch and move items, and kinesthetic learners like to move. Truthfully, all learning styles can learn in any setting. They have, for the most part, adapted. We've all adapted. But now more and more people depend on visual cues. So I have another chat opportunity for you. So imagine that you want to teach about comparisons in a session. So how do you compare two things? For example, restaurant X is more expensive than restaurant Y, and restaurant Y is healthier than restaurant X. So these are comparisons. So if you wanted to teach with visual learners, with auditory learners, with tactile learners, or with kinesthetic learners, what are some different ways that you could teach comparison? So I'm going to see if we have any ideas that come up in the chat for teaching this to meet those different styles of learners. Oh, okay, we have some good ones. So looking at menus for visual and tactile learners. I like that. Lots of using the menu. A graph, great. Coins and dollars, show receipts. Maps for locations. These are all really great ideas. I think this also, if we think about the different learning styles, it can help us to be more creative in how we plan sessions. So what words or symbols mean more expensive or less? Draw and talk about them. Oh, write menu choices on the board, compare costs, discuss healthy qualities of food, use pictures. Great, lots of good ideas. So yeah, for visual learners, I might show them how we make comparisons, right? On the board, I could write out the grammar for what we do with that. For auditory learners, they could listen to some example sentences that are read aloud. For tactile learners, I could cut up even the sentences and have them move the sentences or create sentences using the pieces. So they could create different, this restaurant is more whatever than that restaurant. They could do those with the cards or the cut up pieces of paper. We could do, for kinesthetic learners, we could do a continuum in the room where we meet. So on one side, I could say, okay, this is which restaurant is more expensive, and they can physically move, and then say the sentence when they get to that corner in the classroom or in the room where you're meeting. So there's lots of ways that we can encourage them to also realize their learning styles. Afterwards, we could say, which one do you think helped you to learn best? And then they could take that into their learning at home. And they could say, you know what, I think I process information best when I write the words down. There's something about that process of writing words down that really helps me. So that could help them Also with realizing that metacognition of what helps them learn better. Motivation is going to be a key to all things, right? And language learning is tough. It is not easy. So how can we help the learners to be motivated to continue? Some things that we can do is help them set goals, small goals, and then big goals. So you might have, okay, in the next 5 weeks, what's your goal? And then what's your ultimate goal? And then why do you want to meet that goal? If they have a why that they can share too, that will help them. You could have them draw it out and share and keep that piece of paper and bring it to sessions and talk about, how are you doing on your goal progress for the short-term goal? And then that check-in, that accountability is really helpful. So they need to have this favorable attitude that they're still making progress, they're not getting discouraged, and they need to be working towards meeting that goal. So just the accountability you can provide is really helpful in the tutoring session. So not to put too much pressure on you, but we really do have a lot of power to push learners towards wanting to learn the language and to drive them into attitudes of, I'm just not a good language learner. It's too hard. I don't want to do this. So if we can help them again to stay motivated, that's going to keep them in learning English and keep them happier in their interactions that they have on a daily basis in English. So sustaining motivation, we can also give feedback. I think in outside of school systems, we often think, okay, they don't want quizzes or tests or feedback, but actually there's that sense of accomplishment that comes with achieving something. So if we prepare them well and we say, okay, there's going to be a quiz on Thursday, and this is what we're going to have the quiz over. And it's not an incredibly hard quiz, but then there's that chance to give them a sticker or give them that positive feedback and say, look, at the beginning, I gave you the same quiz, and now 3 weeks in, your score went up by 5 points or whatever it is. Some other things we can do is make learning enjoyable. Language learning has so many opportunities to turn boring activities into fun interaction. And like I said, most of that, those sort of practical tips come in the second part of this, but we can look for creative ways to make the process enjoyable. And we can also show that we care for the learners who are coming, asking them how they're doing. If they share something about what happened in their life, we can check on that the next session. So most tutors are volunteers and they really do this to care and to interact with those who are coming. So I think they're already doing this, but just as a reminder that can be enough to keep the learner coming back and learning. Trying to acknowledge every single learner that comes. So going around and giving them an opportunity to share, even if it's only a few words, personalizing that feedback and listening to them are all things we can do to build that rapport where there's a sense of positive energy in the room, that they're excited to be there and they feel connected to each other and to us as the tutor. So when we are getting started, how do we start? So we have this concept of needs analysis, or what is it that the learners need? And this can be at the program level, where the library is looking at taking intake information from them and looking at their proficiency. But this can also be at the tutoring session, the small group level too. So one tool that's useful are proficiency systems that are already out there. So definitions of levels. One of them is the American Council for Teachers of Foreign Languages, ACFL. And they have nice videos that show you what a novice learner looks like and an intermediate learner. They also have can-do statements, things that you should be able to do at the specific levels. So if you know what level your students or these learners are at, then you can find materials online that are at that level. You can find textbooks that are at that level. And that opens up to knowing, okay, you don't have to have a master's in TESOL to find resources that work for the learners. Oftentimes, when I've observed lessons around, some of the materials that the tutors are bringing in are really difficult. So they might bring in like an excerpt from Hemingway because they love Hemingway. That's going to take more to get the learners to that level where they can interact with Hemingway, depending on the levels of the students that show up. So something that we need to look at is their proficiency. So I have some on a slide about how a simple way we could do that if the library isn't telling us, or the center that we work in isn't telling us what their proficiency is. On the next slide, we'll look at that. So what are their home languages? Where do they speak English? This is really useful information so that we can better tutor them and we understand what their context is. How do they use English? Why do they want to learn English? So we need to know something about them. This is a simple form. You can change this. It's just a first day of tutoring form that you can have them fill out. So you can ask them to write this down, or you could give an interview form too. Like if you wanted to just write down for them. I find having them write something is really useful. A lot of times we have long-term immigrants whose spoken abilities, their fluency in speaking is pretty high. And then it's not until you have them write something that you realize that even basic spelling is an issue. So you can see, what is your name? And you give them the sentence starter, my name is. So pretty much everyone can write down what their name is. But then you can get into, do they understand some English grammar? How much can they use pronunciation? If you're asking them it verbally, or punctuation, if they're writing it down. And then I do dictation too. So with dictation, they don't see this. On a piece of paper, they just write down, I say hello, I say it 3 times, they write down hello. And then the sentences get progressively more challenging. So I get a sense for where the learners are just by this simple activity on the first day. And some of them, when I've given similar documents, they can only write their name and maybe 2 or 3 things other than that. And that's okay. That tells me a lot about where they're at. But I could also come back and I can give them the same form at the end of our sessions and see how they're doing, and then celebrate with them when they are able to answer more. It's especially helpful if you know what you might be covering in your sessions, so you can put some of that content in there to get a sense. Some other things you can do when you're starting with a new group are just regular activities where you get to know each other. This is a simple find someone who says yes. Find someone who says yes. So, do you like to eat pizza? Does your name start with A? These are yes and no. So it's pretty easy. You would maybe need to pre-teach some of the vocabulary words to make sure that everyone understands the questions, but then you can have them mingle with each other until they find someone who says yes to each one of these, and they can write their names down. So you learn something about the learners, but you also see how well they pronounce the questions. Did they understand the questions? And you can share with each other. So this is telling you important information about the learners, and they don't know that this is needs analysis. They just think this is a fun activity. Another thing that you can do for needs analysis, and needs analysis is just, we want to understand who the learners are so we can better serve them. At the end of your session for the day, you can give them something like this. You don't have to give it. You could just write it on a board, and they could write it on a scrap piece of paper. So you list the activities that you did for the day, and you can ask them, was it helpful? Did you like it? And they just give you a smiley face or a sad face. So even low-level learners can participate in these kind of activities. So if they're finding the vocabulary pair work, you're getting a lot of sad faces, maybe you don't do that the next time. So feedback for you as a tutor is really helpful too, to know how it's going, and you can ask them how it's going too, but sometimes having it written down and something simple like a little exit ticket like this is helpful. Okay, we're going to transition to teaching skills. So those were some general principles that we just covered, and now we're going to get into more of the skills. So if I asked you, you would probably be able to come up with what the 4 skills of language are. They're reading, speaking, writing, and listening. We also have some sub-skills like pronunciation and grammar and vocabulary. Of those 4 skills, listening and reading are considered receptive skills. Oops, sorry about that. And speaking and writing are considered productive skills. So in general, our receptive skills are stronger than our productive skills. Even in our first language, we can probably hear or read certain words that we don't produce. We might not know how to pronounce them, or we just never use them in our productive language. So when we're looking at the 4 skills, it's really oftentimes tutoring focuses on speaking and listening, but it's helpful to bring in all of the skills. If you think about navigating life with weak reading skills, all of the things that you have to read to survive in the United States, or not being able to write, let's say, an email to a child's teacher or something like that, or a note, or filling out a form. So we can look at writing in what do our students need to know with writing. So you can get an application form and you can print it out and have them work on filling out application forms. So if they wanted to apply for a job, you could also look at something like how to fill out an Indeed form if you have access to computers, and that's something that would be helpful for your students. We're going to focus on communicative language teaching. So this is the approach that's been popular since the 1970s in the United States. And it's the idea that we're learning language so that we can use the language. And of course, with adult learners who are living in the United States, they're learning the language so they can use it, not just understand the grammar, which is a key part of language. But they may have taken classes, let's say in their home country, where they studied grammar a lot, but there was no emphasis on actually speaking, and communicative tasks like being able to successfully buy something wasn't the focus in their classrooms. So there's 4 basic components to communicative language teaching, which we're not going to focus on much. One of them is, how do you navigate or repair communication? This could be really good sessions for tutoring, even though it's not often the focus. What happens when you don't understand what someone said? What happens in the classroom when you don't understand, or in the tutoring session when you don't understand what I say? How do you navigate those communication breakdowns, and having them practice that in a safe space like a tutoring session is really helpful. So then when communication does break down in real life, they've already practiced it, right? It's automatic. Could you say that again? Could you repeat that? They've repeated those phrases so many times that when they need them, it just comes out automatically. Grammar and pronunciation, we all need clear pronunciation and grammar to some extent for people to understand. So if their grammar is impacting intelligibility, or their pronunciation is impacting intelligibility, we can work on those in some easy ways, even for people who don't feel completely confident in teaching grammar. There's lots of ways that we can do that in a tutoring session. Also, politeness. The better you get at language, the more expectations there are that you will understand what is polite and what is not. So we can build those into sessions. So it could be as simple as beginning level greetings. How do you greet different people in your life who have different relationships with you? How does that look different? So anytime you notice something in a tutoring session where, oh, that could be perceived as really impolite, you might want to address it. So this could be things like commanding others to do something, which often in English we don't command unless it's a pet or a child or like in a teacher situation. And so if they're using commands when they really mean to be using requests, that could create a lot of conflict in their lives that they could avoid. And then another aspect is just how you put things together, but keeping in mind that things like politeness and how to repair communication, we often don't focus on those, and they're such important skills. So with communicative language teaching, the tutor's a facilitator, and they're not dominating the talking time. Nothing like this training where I'm dominating the talking time. It's really difficult to do this, and experienced ESL teachers and tutors, I see them all the time, where it's something like this, where they're continually talking. And what we want is for the learners to be using the language 80% of the time. And for us as tutors to be talking 20% of the time. So this happens when we're not tutor-centered or teacher-centered, but we're really having a communicative session. So one thing you might do is even record a tutoring session and see who does most of the communicating. Is it you or is it the learners who are doing most of the communicating? One easy way that we can increase the amount of time that learners talk or write or do individual work, but they're the ones using the language, is to focus more on pair and group activities and not so much on whole group, because oftentimes whole group is the tutor talking and the learners listening. Yes, they're working on their listening, but really they need to be pushed to that communication and to the more natural interaction that happens in those smaller groupings. So when we're setting up tutoring sessions, one thing we want to look for all of these ways that we can support students. So the next few slides share a few of those. So we can break this complex task of language learning into smaller pieces, and we can look at things that we can do. One easy thing to do is to establish a routine. So all of our tutoring sessions, they look a certain way. This is useful on so many levels. For one, as a tutor, it's so much easier to know, okay, I know exactly what we do for the first 20 minutes, for the next 10 minutes, and then, the actual activities look different, but we have a routine. The learners also feel safe with routines, especially when you're navigating life in a second language. You can feel more insecure. And so those routines are going to help them. So then you could just write out a little plan for yourself each time. And it's like, okay, we always start with small talk. And in the small talk, it looks like this. I come up with 3 questions and they can expect those questions and they know what's going to happen when they come. So you can look at what routine works best for the learners and for how you're structuring your sessions. Another thing that we can do to help the learners is to always keep their experience and knowledge in mind. So one thing that tutors like to do is say something like, well, today we're going to talk about this. This is what this means. This is how you do this. That's great. But actually, why not ask them, okay, today we're going to talk about this. What can you tell me about the topic, the grammar point, the vocabulary word? So you're always eliciting from the learners what they know, and they can learn from each other. So if my student knows the meaning of the word, then I can just support the student instead of me, again, talking. And also give them some thinking time. So when learning a language, the cognitive load, how much you have to think is really high. It's a lot. So we want to remove some of that cognitive load so they can focus on the language. One thing we can do is say, okay, today we're going to be talking about, you fill in that topic. Take 2 minutes and take some notes. What do you already know about this topic? So their schema is activated, their background knowledge is activated. They're ready to learn. They're an expert on that topic. Maybe not in English, but they are in their first language. Something else you can do to reduce that load and free up more space for the language learning is to help them with vocabulary. Actually, pre-teaching or post-teaching vocabulary, the research shows us that they're both really useful. So if words come up in an activity that they didn't know, it's fine to teach it afterwards. But if you're trying to prepare them for success, then help them to understand the vocabulary early. It's actually a really difficult skill to teach vocabulary. I don't know if you've had this experience, but someone will say, oh, hey, Tasha, can you tell me what fill in the blank means? And then I try to define it. And I find that my explanation is less than excellent. Even though I have all of this knowledge about what language learners need to understand something, it's hard to come up with good definitions. So I highly recommend an English Learners Dictionary. They're free, they're online, they have great resources in them, and you can also help all of the learners to use those dictionaries. So if they have their phones or if you have access to something, you can say, let's look it up in the dictionary. This is one of my favorites, although I have a whole list of favorites. This is the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English, and I looked up the word dictionary. It has some information about how to pronounce it there. It tells me if it's countable, meaning do I need an article with it, like a, an, or the. It also, I can listen to how it's pronounced, and then it gives me a definition. So if I'm preparing some materials, I can look up some of those and I can come up with these simple definitions that somebody has already created for me. So this might help if you give them definitions of some of the words and the activities that you're going to use. For lower level learners, you can give them sentence starters or sentence frames. So they only have to come up with the vocabulary or the verb or whatever it is that you're working on for that activity. This frees them up to focus in on the learning for just that day. So if we're talking about, someone suggested earlier, going to the grocery store, what will you buy? I'll buy. And then they make a list of maybe 3 things that they're going to buy at the grocery store that day because you're talking about it. So what does this do? It gives them the grammar and they're practicing over and over again. So it becomes automatic. If we just practice something like a vocabulary word over and over again, but we don't give them any words that go with it, they're called collocations. If we don't give them those words that go along with it, then when it comes to usage, it's harder because they might not know how to put that all together into a sentence. So for lower level learners especially, give them these sentence starters or sentence frames up on the board. Keep them up there, whatever you're learning, have them write them in their books, and then they can just fill in. And then maybe later you can erase them because it's become automatic. They remember how to say that sentence. Another thing that really helps learners is graphic organizers. So a graphic organizer just means some way of visually organizing information. You do not have to copy these or print these out. You can have learners in their notebook make their own. So this could be as simple as, we're going to watch this clip and I want you to draw 3 circles on your paper. In the first circle, you're going to write, and you tell them what to focus on. In the second circle, you're going to focus on this. And in the third circle, you're going to focus on this third thing. This takes away a lot of pressure and it frees them up because they know exactly what to focus on now. Okay, when I'm listening, I'm going to be writing just about these 3 things. So when you're preparing a task for them to do, have them create a graphic organizer. You can create it yourself. I love Canva. So every single graphic in this presentation was created in Canva, and it's free. And it's just a great resource. So here's some of their pre-made. If you type in graphic organizer, here's 2 that came up. So you can look and see if they already have worksheets there. And you don't necessarily need to print these out. If printing is an issue, you could just have them draw on their paper the boxes. But graphic organizers are really helpful, again, for allowing the learner to focus on the language and to improve their language skills. So here's an example of, I'm going to walk you through how we could apply some of these principles to an actual session. And this session is related to grammar, everyone's favorite. So how can we make grammar communicative, and how can we make it interactive for the students? So I'm going to start with our warm-up here. So actually, I'll have you type the answers because it's just kind of fun to see everyone's answers. On the board or on cards that I could write out, I'll have, when the learners come in, they have a few questions that they respond to. So this is a pretty low-level group, and you can see I've given them the sentence frame. So go ahead in the chat and answer them. Did you eat a lot of candy as a child? Did you have a pet as a child? And did you like sports when you were a child? And notice it's, if you say yes, oftentimes you have to tell us, like, yes, I had a cat. Ooh, somebody already answered. No. Ooh, candy every day of the week almost. I like that adverb of frequency. We have an advanced learner. Yes, 2 or 3 times a week. Regina had a dog and she liked to play basketball. You can see how if the students are answering these with each other, right? So you're giving them the language and they're in partners. They're saying, did you eat a lot of candy as a child? Maybe we work on their pronunciation. Maybe not. Maybe I just let them talk. And then they have all of that language that they can respond with, but it's real information about them. This is important because they're going to be much more engaged when it's real information about them. Past tense can be hard, right? So I'm not sure about your settings, but we tend to get like novice, high, intermediate, low, and present and past tense are hard. And especially the questions and the negatives are hard for them at that level, especially. So this is, I just want to read all your answers because it's fun to see the answers, but I'm going to keep going. Then I'm going to do some discovery learning. So look at the positive and negative responses and see if they, again, I'm eliciting from them. So at this point, they've talked to each other now, and then I just stop them for a short time. Maybe I started with telling them something about my childhood, right? So that might have come before the warm-up. Now I ask them to analyze and tell me if they can see any patterns in how you answer questions that start with did. So I would get from them what they think the rules might be about how you make a question with did and how you answer with a yes or a no. So maybe they can see those patterns. Like when I say no, I say I didn't. But when I say yes, I can say I did, but I can also say I liked. And maybe they'll see some of those things, right? I won't ask you to analyze, but then I would give them a few basic rules, right? This isn't, a lot of times we're not teaching grammar intensive classes, but rules can help, especially with grammar. If they've noticed the rules themselves first, that's really going to help them. And they say, oh, I see it. And then maybe it'll help them connect that rule and to remember it. So Then I have them, we look at the rules and I have them practice. So as a whole group, we practice. I ask them, maybe going around the room, did you go to the store yesterday? And they have to say, and I can have the sentence frame written on the board still. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. So I ask a few questions. Then we go to whole group practice. Oh, that's more whole group practice. So I keep them on the board. I ask them. Then they go to pair practice, and I have this as a worksheet if you want it. So there's actually 4 of these sets, and you give them from the dollar store. You can get like 4 or 6 dice. You give the pairs 1 dice, and they take turns. They roll the dice. If they get a 1 the first time, they say, did you walk to the store last month? I created, how many is it? 24 did questions. So some of them are more fun than others. And you can change these, right? Did you grow up in Africa? If I don't have students from Africa, maybe I change that. So each time, if they roll a 1 the second time, they ask the second. I have them labeled as A, B, C, D. So they ask, did you get a gift for your birthday? And then they have to answer, yes, I did. No, I didn't. But then try to answer with a second sentence. So they're taking turns. When they roll, they ask the question and the other one responds. Then they take turns. The other one rolls. They ask the question. The other one responds. So again, you can imagine how active this is. And something as simple as adding the dice in there makes it fun. And I'm not talking. I'm maybe monitoring what they're doing. Then we move into individual practice, where they write 3 questions of their own that start with did. So can they do it? Can they write their own questions? And then interaction, have students ask their questions. So there are 3 questions they just wrote, and go around. So they could switch partners and they're asking. And you can see now for the whole tutoring session, they've been interacting and it's becoming automatic. They've asked, did. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. How many times have they done that now? So many times. We didn't focus too much on grammar, right? And then I want to transfer it. So, okay, report back after what kind of answers did you get from the 3 questions you asked? And then go home and ask 2 friends or family members about their childhoods and what they did as a child, because we're trying to work on those past tense, and then take notes. And next time I'm going to ask you to tell me about what they did. And we could work on reporting language too. We could change it to he, whatever. We could look at past tense. Again, not too much grammar. Don't feel intimidated by the grammar if that's not your area of strength. This is just using the language, but giving them grammar that they can internalize, which is really going to help them with their language learning. Okay, so I think, yeah, we're right at the time where we have 8 minutes left. So I wanted to stop this section for questions and ideas. I did want to say next Monday, we'll go back to the questions and ideas. We're going to continue the training. So this is only the first part of the training that I would do. And we're going to look at how we can teach those individual skills like vocabulary, listening, speaking, grammar, and then how we can encourage tutors to organize sessions too. So that'll be next Monday. But for this week, do you have any ideas that you think, oh, this is a great idea? I'd love to share it with everyone else, or questions. So feel free. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'll bring it back up at the very end when there's something for you to do at the very end too. Yes, you can have, I have freely shared all of the handouts. I think there's 3 handouts from this this portion. There's a lot more for the second portion, and then the slides. We'll make, I'm not sure how we'll make those available to you. I think that someone else can answer that question. Oh, that's a great question. Yes. Oh, thanks, Bev. They're on the Call Academy. So how do you modify this when you work with just one person? I think all of this can work. you don't have to worry so much about you taking over, because it's more of an interactive conversation at that point. So you could do the same lesson we just went through, but you could take out, actually you could, depending on where you're meeting, they could go out into the library, let's say, and they could ask a few people questions, say, I'm learning English, and they could even survey with the 3 questions that they wrote. And then you're even giving them practice time. Textbooks are great. They help provide content. They can just sometimes take over. So I think if you have the resources for textbook for the learners and you have a good textbook, then I think they can be really helpful. But I think don't let them control everything, because if you do that, then the interaction often drops quite a bit and you're so focused on covering the content in the textbook. So I think that's one thing we can look at next time too, is how, if I do have a textbook, how can I make it more interactive? Oh, how would you encourage someone to write if they have low writing skills and are ashamed of their writing skills? I think models are really helpful. And I don't know, I don't think we're going to have time to address writing next time. But one thing I like to do is write a story via sentences, individual sentences. So have them build a story. And then before they know it, they're just writing one sentence at a time, right? And then they put all those sentences together into a paragraph about themselves, let's say, and then they verbally share that paragraph. So you can have those sentence starters organized so that they can then create this whole paragraph, and then they can get this positive feedback that can build their resilience with writing, because they might feel intimidated. I like to do dictation too, like spelling dictation, and have little quizzes and things like that, because that can help them to feel more comfortable with writing too. Oh, I'm sorry, you're going to miss it. We're recording next week too, so you can watch the recording, and you can have all of the resources. So anyone can have both of these and the slides, and then you could use the slides with your own tutors in your area too. That's so great, Julie. I would love go out and talk to any of the library staff about these. If you are working in a one-on-one situation, that would be so good for them to feel more confident in their language use if they were talking to more than just you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Tasha, on behalf of all the libraries of California Library Literacy Services and the Literacy Initiatives Project. This was a great day, and we look forward to next Monday. So we know that we reached a lot of people today, but we're going to reach a lot more people with the recording. This was a training that was much in demand by the field, and it was really great. I think everybody will walk out today having something they can use tomorrow, which is always a good goal for training.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I hope you can use any of these resources to help train your tutors or for yourself.